Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday the 17th of December in London. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Bloomberg Intelligence finds the biggest listed firms won't bear the brunt of the UK's national insurance hike. Donald Trump says Ukraine needs to reach a deal to end Russia's invasion. Plus, why the runaway success of Novo Nordisk and its weight loss drugs are causing headaches for other businesses in Denmark. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Exclusive analysis from Bloomberg shows the majority of Britain's biggest listed companies will account for less than 3% of the revenue raised by Labour's increased payroll tax. James Woolcock has the story.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer promised to target those with the broadest shoulders when he came into office. However, Bloomberg Intelligence has found that Chancellor Rachel Reeves's plans to raise up to £26 billion a year from a hike to national insurance will be hitting firms that depend on British workers rather than the UK's biggest companies. Bloomberg's calculations found that a group of 88 FTSE 100 businesses will pay just 2.4% of the total amount the Treasury is hoping to raise. That Bloomberg reporting comes as Reeves signalled that any further shortfall to government funding will be dealt with by spending cuts. That's ahead of the next update from the budget watchdog in March. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
China's foreign ministry says the country's actions have all been above board after the Chinese businessman at the centre of spying allegations was named in the High Court in London. Yang Tengbo, who acted as a business advisor to Prince Andrew, has been banned from the UK on national security grounds, but insists he's done nothing wrong. Speaking yesterday, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer defended his approach to relations with Beijing.
It's important to engage. Of course we have to challenge where we must, but it's better to engage to challenge than to stay aside, as it were. Important to cooperate where we can on issues like climate change. I'm very pleased with the engagement and the progress that we've made.
The latest developments have put pressure on Starmer's plan to boost ties with Beijing and sparked demands for tougher restrictions on China's operatives in the UK. Donald Trump says Ukraine needs to reach a deal to end the Russian invasion. The US president-elect also criticised the Biden administration's decision to allow Kyiv to use US-made weapons to strike deeper into Russian territory. Here's some of what Trump told reporters at his Florida home.
Got to be a deal. No, got to be a deal. Too many people being killed. That is a war that's too many people. Got to make a deal. And Putin has to make a deal. What deal?
Trump's comments come as 12 European countries are set to announce plans to check the insurance policies of Russian tankers. The controls are being imposed to deter the shadow fleet of uninsured or underinsured vessels that move millions of barrels of Russian crude around the world in defiance of Western sanctions. A New York state judge has rejected Donald Trump's request to set aside his conviction in the hush money case on the grounds of presidential immunity. The judge rejected Trump's argument that his trial was tainted by witness testimony and other evidence that wouldn't have been allowed under a US Supreme Court ruling. Bloomberg's legal reporter Bob Van Voris has the details.
Judge Merchan ruled that Trump had failed to preserve most of the objections to the evidence that he objected to, meaning that the judge is unable to rule on it because he didn't, object at the time. He ruled also that even if he had preserved those objections, they would not fall within the immunity.
Bloomberg's legal reporter Bob Van Voris says it's far from certain that the case will proceed to sentencing as the US president-elect continues to challenge the verdict. China is said to be keeping its growth target of about 5% for next year and raising its budget deficit to 4% of GDP. The Reuters report comes days after top leaders, including President Xi Jinping, held a yearly economic conference in Beijing where they were expected to set goals for 2025. Both of the reported targets are in line with economists' expectations after policymakers stepped up pledges to increase government spending and economic policy support. Germany is heading for early elections. Lawmakers have voted to hold the federal election in 2 months' time, backing Chancellor Olaf Scholz's plan to end his term early. Scholz called the confidence vote after his coalition collapsed following the firing of Finance Minister Christian Lindner. Bloomberg Television's Oliver Crook says the vote was a bitter personal debate.
Olaf Scholz was talking about the FDP, that is the party that had the finance ministry. He's saying that basically they're morally unfit to govern. Merz, for his part, the head of the CDU, Angela Merkel's traditional party, said that Scholz is a failed chancellor. And then on the other side of things, on the far right, you have the Alternative for Deutschland, the far-right group that has 20% of the vote going into this election, saying that Germany is on the brink of collapse, and a vote for Friedrich Merz and the CDU is a vote for war with Russia.
Crook adds the political uncertainty comes at a delicate time for Europe's largest economy, which has stagnated for years. And the Bank of France has cut its 2025 growth outlook to 0.9% as the country's political upheaval drags on. The downgrade to the forecast shows the damage being caused by the collapse of the government. The chairman of Engie, Jean-Pierre Clamadieu, is one of the business leaders sounding the alarm.
This situation impacts business confidence. I hope again that we will have in the next few weeks more certainties and that this will allow the business cycle to restart.
Clamadieu there was speaking to Bloomberg. The French Parliament unanimously voted through a bill to keep the state functioning as the fourth Prime Minister this year looks to form a new government. Those are your top stories on the markets. We saw the Nasdaq finishing another record high on Wall Street yesterday, rising by 1.5%. Treasury yields in the US dollar little changed. Brent crude fell by 0.8% yesterday. It's a little higher today, trading just over $74 a barrel. Bitcoin hit another record of nearing 108,000. Today it's trading just shy of 107,000, up slightly on the day. And in the Asian trading session, the MSCI Asia Pacific Index down 0.2%, and the CSI 300 is up by 0.5% on those reports of higher deficit spending by China in 2025. Well, in a moment, we'll bring you more on that UK tax story, plus why the success of Novo Nordisk is causing trouble for other Danish businesses. But first, to a restaurant review with a difference. Now, you might be used to reading about high-end eateries or Michelin-starred dining from big-name chefs, but our colleague Helen Chandler-Wild has been broadening your horizons this morning with a review of the Ratatouille-themed restaurant in Disneyland Paris. Firstly, she quite rightly points out it's very difficult to get a booking in this restaurant if you are planning a trip to Disneyland. That's despite the fact that it opened 10 years ago. The decor features giant plates separating the tables, champagne corks as stools, and everything to make you feel like that you are very small, rat-sized, some might suggest, in the world of Ratatouille. The food, classically French, and definitely a step above your traditional theme park restaurant. I'll let you read Helen's piece to find out what she made of the food. I actually ate in this restaurant 10 years ago. I remember finding the whole experience very charming, but it's interesting that it still has such a draw so many years later, and given that it's, you know, a decent nearly 20 years since the film was first released as well, people still flocking to the Ratatouille themed restaurant, as it's very hard to get into in Disneyland Paris. You can read more on that on Bloomberg.com and on the terminal. Let's bring you more details now, though, of Bloomberg's analysis of who will pay the brunt of employers' national insurance hikes that were announced in October's budget. Our UK business editor, Julian Harris, joins us for more. Julian, just first of all, how much more will employers have to pay under these hikes?
It really depends on the structure of your company. The measures are really bad for any business that has a lot of part-time staff. And typically, if those staff are on minimum wage, which they often are, then that can have a really big hit. Because what Labour's done is it's increased the rate of this tax, so that's gone up from 13.8% to 15%, but it's also dropped the threshold at which it starts to being paid. So previously, you didn't pay any NI contributions on someone unless they earned at least £9,100 a year. That's come down to 5,000. So a lot of businesses have, if you have a large amount of part-time staff who are earning, say, 7K, 8K a year, you're now really getting hammered because you're now then introduced into this tax that you weren't even paying previously.
Now, in announcing this, Keir Starmer had said that the tax hikes would target those with the broadest shoulders. What has this analysis found out about who's going to be paying the bill?
I mean, some of the companies do have broad shoulders, we'll be honest. Tesco, Sainsbury's, M&S, these are very, very big retailers in the UK. Obviously, they're part of the FTSE themselves, and their individual bills, they're some of the highest payers. They've come out. They're going to be paying over £100 million extra each per year. But what we found is, of course, that that's not That's not the limit of big business in the UK at all. We've got the huge banks, we've got a vast number of FTSE companies, huge miners, who are getting off relatively lightly because they don't fall into the category of companies that are severely affected by this. They don't have a large number of staff in the UK often. Of course, some of the banks do, but they don't have this sort of mass of part-time minimum wage staff. So across the FTSE as a whole, and this is the top line finding that we made, is that if you take out the dozen retailers from the FTSE and you just look at the other 88 FTSE companies, they will in total be paying less than 3% of this total tax hit.
Because the goal of this tax rise had been to avoid working people paying more. But is that going to be the case ultimately?
I mean, it's really a classic situation, isn't it? We've got, when, economists talk about the incidence of tax and where a tax actually falls. And of course, in politics, we never really get to that point. Politicians still really say, we're taxing businesses, we're not taxing individuals. But it's clear from this that there will be knock-on effects. So even the OBR, the government's own fiscal watchdog, said that wages will be affected by this, and they added that into their calculations. We don't really know to what extent prices are going to increase because of this. A lot of retailers have said, look, we don't have any choice but to increase prices now. You've put our taxes up, you've put minimum wage up. There are workers' rights laws coming in. We are going to have to increase prices, and I think it's likely there will be some effect on prices as well. But certainly, this starts to weigh down on salaries also.
Okay, Julian Harris, our UK business editor, thank you very much for joining us with details of that story. Now, the pharmaceutical giant Novo Nordisk has supercharged the Danish economy with the success of its weight loss and diabetes drugs Ozempic and Wegovy. But other businesses in Denmark are now complaining that Novo's success has left them struggling to hire staff. Our Copenhagen reporter Sanne Vass joins us now for more on this story. Sanne, Novo Nordisk is the number one driver of GDP and job growth in Denmark. Why are people complaining?
That is a good question. What is there to complain about? I mean, Danish economy is doing well. Employment is at record high thanks to Novo Nordisk. And of course, that is good news for Denmark overall. But it's just not everyone who's feeling those benefits. I mean, Denmark is a small country. We're about 6 million people. And Novo at the moment is on such a hiring binge that it's vacuuming the labor market for everything it can get. And Novo is able to attract a lot. It offers attractive salaries, good benefits. It's a place people want to go to work. But it means for other companies, and especially those that are present in regions where Novo is expanding and now also in Odense where it's moving to a completely new location, many of these companies are struggling. They're losing a lot of staff to Novo. And not only are they losing staff, but they also don't have anyone left to recruit. So Novo's hiring spree, I mean, it's been going on for a couple of years in Denmark now, but it's now small businesses especially are really feeling the pain.
So what are the consequences then for these businesses and for the Danish economy more broadly of not being able to find staff?
Yeah, well, it means that some companies, they just cannot grow as they would have wanted to or otherwise could have. They have to turn down orders. We're hearing of companies that have to delay building projects because the construction companies don't have enough staff. I spoke to one company that decided to move production abroad. It was simply just easier that way. And an owner of a car service shop decided to close down because he was just exhausted from having to look for staff all the time. He was located about half a mile from Novo and Kalundborg. So that was clearly not to his benefit. So we're starting to see the consequences really of this labor starvation, if you like. And for the Danish economy as a whole, well, it means that growth is now increasingly centered around this one company and now also at the expense of others. And obviously that creates some sort of concentration risk that could become a problem for Denmark down the road.
So what sort of solutions are the government and local authorities looking at to try to solve this problem?
Yeah, I'd say the number one solution that both government and also local municipalities are exploring that is getting more international labor to Denmark to fill these roles and this gap. And that has already happened to some extent. We've seen easing of restrictions for foreign workers and tax incentives, creating international schools, more international degrees. But it's also a bit of a controversial approach in Denmark because across the political spectrum and also in the Danish population, there are many people who don't want more immigrants to Denmark. Denmark already has one of the strictest immigration policies in Europe for that reason. And changing that approach is just not something that all Danes welcome. So it's limited how much Denmark can really open its borders. And in the meantime, businesses, they're just left to find new ways to attract staff. Some are engaging with their employees on pay and benefits to counter Novo offers. But sadly, we're probably going to hear more stories of struggling businesses as Novo continues to grow.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.